Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim. This is another Real Ideal Gear review, and today we're looking at the Casio GA2300. I consider this kind of the stealth or the clandestine watch, the watch for CIA agents and people who work in the dark corners of the world. But in reality, it's just a cool looking watch that's kind of a blackout look to it. So let's take a look at this watch and go through the 5 things we typically go through. And you're going to find that this watch is very similar to the CasiOak in a lot of ways. And some of the handicaps of the CasiOak also apply to this watch. But this watch also has, I think, a couple of design features, some form features about this watch that really make it a very attractive watch that I might be willing to overlook some of those things. So let's take a look at this watch up close. So let's go through the 5 things we typically go through, which are size, fitment, finish, accuracy, and then legibility and lume. So starting off with size, it is about a 42.1 by 11.6 millimeters high off the wrist. The proportions of those two together really kind of get close to the chunky feel, but not quite chunky as far as just, too high off the wrist and too narrow of a diameter of the case. So this to me is it's good. I don't mind it that much. It's a little more chunky than the CasiOak. It's a little less chunky than the Casio Square, the 5610. So I like. Now, just to insert a little bit of information about chunkiness, I've compared this watch to the GAB2100 or the GWM5610, which is the Square. And I'm going to put up here at the screen what those proportions look like and how this watch matches up with those two. I'm going to have a later video either this week or next week, or very soon anyway, that's going to take almost all of my watches and run them through a calculation to see what the proportion is, the value that I generate as far as the diameter across the dial compared to the height off the wrist. Is there a sweet spot number that you want to stay above, or is there a sweet spot number that in between some numbers so that it has the correct proportional feel and look to it? I'm going to do a video on that, but as far as this watch goes, it's kind of on the edge, and the overall score for this one was 3.6, which is pretty good. Anything that's higher than about a 3.3 or 3.4 is getting above that chunky side into more of that more appealing proportion side. Anything that gets below that into that 3s or high 2s, it really starts to look like a chunky watch. And so for comparison, the 5610, which is a 43.2 millimeter by 12.7 millimeter watch, it has a score of 3.4. And then you have the 2100, the GAB2100, that's the CasiOak, which has a case diameter of 45.4 millimeters by 11.9, which has a ratio score of 3.8. So that's getting closer to that 4, which for my taste, I really like that high 3s into the 4s, and I'm going to go through this again with a bunch of other watches. So this watch ended up scoring a 3.6, the CasiOak is a 3.8, and then the Square is a 3.4. So I like the proportions of this watch an awful lot. I also like the size of the buttons. To me, the buttons on this watch are great. They have that kind of chrome finish on there, so they stand out a little bit too as far as contrast goes. But I can definitely feel these buttons. There's nothing to get in the way. It's not like the Square where you're kind of finding that recessed button and trying to use your fingernail to activate whatever mode or whatever the light is, whatever. So to me, the size of the button and the location of the buttons is great. Now, what about the fitment of this watch? What I really like about this is that it lays flat on the tabletop. I think this is a great feature. It's a G-Shock, which you don't find that on a lot of G-Shocks. A lot of times you find that form-fitted kind of strap where it's always in that almost on the wrist feel. But this will lay flat. I think it's great for storage. It's great for putting on the tabletop and that kind of thing. Now, the typical fitment complaint that I have is the holes on the strap are just too far apart. Enough said. Moving on to the finish. Classic resin finish, kind of that dull black finish. And this is where I really think it fits into that kind of blackout look. There's not a lot of shine on this watch. Now, when you look at the dial, you'll see that there's some reflective surfaces on that X cross members that go through the center of the dial, which I think is kind of cool. It adds a little bit of flair, a little bit of texture, some 3D components to the dial. And then you also have, I think, really great finishing with the text of G-Shock on there. You have at the 9 o'clock position, you have the days of the week on that dial there. So that's all great. The handset is very, very well done. I love the hour hand, the minute hand. The hour hand is distinctly different from the minute hand. It's a little bit wider, which I really like. I think every watch should pay attention to the distinction they make between the hour hand and the minute hand, and Casio has done that on this watch. Now, as far as the finish of the strap, I think it's a little heavier duty strap. It's a G-Shock, so it should be. It's a little bit stiffer. I think it's going to last a lot longer. Most G-Shock straps are made to last and withstand a lot more pressure than the typical Casio strap. Now, one thing I don't like, and this is one thing that you typically find on a G-Shock, is a metal buckle. And I don't see a metal buckle here. I think it's plastic. I'm not aware of any kind of DLC coating on here. Yeah, this to me looks like it's a plastic buckle on a G-Shock. Come on, Casio. It's a G-Shock. Put a metal buckle on here. Now, the accuracy of this watch, it has a 3-year battery life on here, plus or minus 15 seconds a month. This is really an accurate watch. Most Casios that I have are in that plus or minus 30 seconds a month. This is plus or minus 15. So the movement that they have in here is obviously inherently more accurate. Now, what about legibility, light, and lume? Legibility of this watch. Now, reading the time from the analog side is very easy to do. The hour hand, minute hand, highly contrasted against the dark dial. Very easy to read the time on the analog side. The digital display, it's the worst I've seen. I mean, it's terrible. I can't read anything without my glasses. Even when I put my glasses on, the negative display doesn't help at all either. So to me, this digital display is the worst I've ever seen, and it's practically useless on this watch. Now, that may sound like I'm torpedoing the score for this watch, or I'm torpedoing whether or not this watch is even going to get a positive review. But keep in mind, this watch is really about the form over the function. So the function side takes a back seat. This reminds me a lot of the CasiOak review that I did, where you really recognize that the design of this watch isn't about the functional side. It isn't about having an easy time reading the stopwatch or reading the alarm or the timer functions that are on there. This is really about the form or the design, the look that this watch portrays on the wrist, which is what this one also does. So I'm willing to overlook some of this, but at the same time, the digital display, it really is almost useless as far as the legibility goes. Now, what about the light? Dual LEDs does a great job of lighting up the analog and the digital display. As a matter of fact, I think the dual LEDs help me read the digital display much more easily than just the ambient light in a room or being outside. So to me, the dual LEDs are really actually very effective. Yeah, and I can read the date right now just by touching the light button. So yeah, it helps a little bit. Now, as far as the lume on this watch, the hour hand and the minute hand do have lume. It's Casio lume. It's not going to be all night lume, but it lasts for a while. So to me, it's good. I like that. Again, you have the lume on the hands. You have the light when you need it. What's not to like? Now, the light itself can be adjusted from 1 second to 3 seconds, and you do that in the timekeeping mode during the setting portion, and you'll find that there's an option in there to set it from 1 second to 3 seconds or 3 seconds to 1 second. You can also go back and forth between 12 hours and 24 hours, and some of the other features that you have in this watch, you can also shift the hands. So if the hands go out of alignment, whether it's the day hand at the 9 o'clock position, or the hour hand or the minute hand, you can do that. You also have the ability to shift the hands out of the way. So if you're using the stopwatch and it's blocking the digital display, by pressing the B and C buttons together, those are the ones diagonal from each other, press them together, and those hands will line up on one of the diagonal axes or the diagonal supports. It lines up there, gets out of the way of the digital display, and it automatically goes back to displaying the time after a given amount of time has gone by. You also have the typical cluster of Casio functions. You have the stopwatch function, you have the world time function, you have 5 alarms, and then you also have a timer function. Now, one of the things I like about this watch, it's a great looking watch. This is one of those Casio, just like the CasiOak, this is one of those Casio's G-Shocks that really has it all nailed when it comes down to the look of the watch. It looks cool. It looks blacked out. It's easy to read the time. If you're just looking for the time to be the easiest thing, you can definitely do this. The digital display is the worst, absolute worst thing about this watch. You have the classic Casio adjustment on the strap, which I'm not a fan of, but it is a heavier duty strap. And also the thing I don't like about this is no metal buckle on a G-Shock. It should have a metal buckle. Come on, Casio. So the overall score for this watch is a 9.2 out of 10. Not a huge fan. I didn't score it below 9. It is definitely above 9. And to me, I'm scoring it at 9.2 because I do like the design of the watch. I do like the look of the watch. But the digital display is so abysmal that it just drags the score down. I'm a function kind of guy, and I think this watch needs to have a little bit more attention given to the digital display. And I think one of the ways to do it is to get rid of the negative display on this particular model. They do sell one without a negative display, but this one should have the option of a negative display or a positive display. The positive display, I think, would help immensely. Even though it's small, it would help with the legibility side of it. So there you go. That's the score for this watch. And if you have any watches that you're interested in that I've reviewed, check out my webpage at realidealgear.com, as I have a bunch of those watches for sale, reviewed watches, limited edition watches. So check that out. I'm also looking forward to your comments on this watch. What do you think of the Casio GA2300? Is it worth it? Is the function more important than the form? Because they put a lot of attention on the form of this watch. I'd love to hear your comments on that. So there you go. My name is Tim. This has been another Real Ideal Gear review. I'll catch you guys next time.